Dare you go into the woods alone? Now, Little Red Riding Hood had to go into the woods alone, and I'm going to tell you the story of why and how she did that. Little Red Riding Hood had spent the whole winter stitching and stitching and stitching the most beautiful red velvet cloak with a great big hood that she could pull right up over her face and snuggle right in. It was so luscious and red, just like this, only it had this great big hood. Now the spring had come and the sun was out and the birds and the bees were buzzing around, and it was really just the perfect weather to go on a visit to see her grandmother. Now, Little Red Riding Hood hadn't seen her granny all winter, so her mother said, "Now look, you normally take this journey with me, but I think the time has come now that you make this journey on your own. I will pack you a basket with red wine, because we know that Granny likes her bottles of red wine, and a nice big piece of cake, and a few other bits and pieces. And off you go in your new cloak. It will keep you warm, and I'm sure you'll be there by tea time. And you can stay over the night if you like." So Red Riding Hood is a little fearful to step out of the safe confines of her village into the deep wood, especially on her own. But she's thinking, I have my magic cloak. I know it will protect me. I have my basket. It will be fine. So off she sets, and her mother says, "Stick to the path and it will take you all the way to Granny's house." Now, Red Riding Hood sets off following the path, but as it winds through the trees, deeper and deeper into the forest, the leaves on the trees are getting thicker and thicker. The light is getting darker and darker because no sunlight can truly get through the canopy of this forest. And she gets to a fork in the path and she can't think which way to turn. And this voice in her head says, "Don't worry about the path. You don't need to stick to the path. Look at that lovely, luscious, mossy grass just to the side of the path. Follow that. That will get you to your grandmother's house." So this voice became very loud, and she found herself stepping off the path and into this beautiful springing turf. And as she's feeling her way, by this time she's kicked off her shoes, she's feeling her way across this earth. Suddenly she sees a big boot step out from behind a tree. And she looks up and she sees a very tall, a very handsome hunter with a very large, sharp axe. "And where are you going, young woman?" he cries. And she squares up to him because she's feeling quite confident in her red velvet cloak with her basket and her bottle of wine. She says, "I'm going to see my grandmother, Perhaps you'd like to show me the way. Now this huntsman is not all that he appears to be, but he thinks for a moment and he says to Red Riding Hood, "Sure, young lady, just jump up onto my shoulders and I'll get you to Granny's in no time." So she climbs up onto his back, and suddenly he's down on all fours and she's clinging on to his broad shoulders, and they're starting to speed faster and faster through the undergrowth of a forest. And as they're speeding, she feels this fur between her fingers, this deep, rich, luxuriant fur. And she's holding on, and then she sees some ears that are not human ears, but the ears of a wolf. And she thinks to herself, "This must be the wolf man I have heard of in the forest. But he is taking me very quickly to my grandmother's house. I shall not be afraid." And soon they are there, and he sets her down in front of the large garden. She gives him a piece of cake, and he bids her farewell. Now Red Riding Hood has spied all the beautiful red roses in her grandmother's garden, and she's spending them the next 30 minutes wafting in their beautiful, luscious fragrance. These are prize red roses that always win the local village fete. But meanwhile, while she's doing this, a huntsman, who's really a wolf, has crept around the back of the house and has knocked on the back door and has been busy selling Granny a gravel path that he's convinced her that she really does need, and that can she possibly pay cash. So she's invited him in, and she's rooting for her handbag, and while she's doing this, he's somehow stepped out of his skin, and as she turns around, she sees the biggest set of gnashing teeth she's ever seen. So Granny, all of a sudden, isn't Granny anymore, because she's entered into the belly of this wolf man, who's now put on Granny's nightdress and put on Granny's curlers and got under the duvet to wait for Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood lifts the latch of the front door, and amongst the gloom, the dark of the hut, she sees who she thinks is her Granny in bed. She sits on the edge of the bed and says, "Granny, can I get in bed with you like we used to in the old days so you can tell me a story?" So, "Oh yes, my dear," this wolf Granny man says. And as she snuggles up to who she thinks is Granny, she says, "My Granny, what big eyes you have! All the better to see you with, my dear." "Oh, Granny, what big hands you have! All the better to make you a new dress, my dear." "Oh, Granny, what big teeth you have!" "All the best to gobble you up with." Ooh! And all of a sudden she's feeling this great great wolfman bearing down upon her. But Red Riding Hood is swift of mind, and she manages to quickly reach her cloak that had fallen to the floor and throw the hood over the head of the wolf. And she wraps it round him really tightly. And then she picks up the axe and she cuts off his head. And before Wolfie knows it, he's in the pot. And Red Riding Hood is cooking up a big stew. And that night, she has this wonderful meaty stew served with this beautiful red bottle of wine. And she sat in her cloak and she is eating the wolf. And she is eating her grandmother. And she curls up by the ashes of the fire and sleeps the most beautiful, deepest sleep that she's ever had. And in the morning, she gets up, she puts on her cloak, she picks up her basket, she takes a look around the room and sees one bone left by the cauldron. And she uses that bone to fasten her cloak. And the last anyone's seen of Red Riding Hood is of this young woman standing proud with a bushy tail hanging out the back of her cloak. And some say that on a dark night, when the moon is full, you can hear her howl to the treetops in the middle of the forest.